Well, I'm so welcome, y'all. We're so glad that you're here, and if you have a chance afterwards, please feel free to roam about and take a quick tour. We're here because we care about our kids, and they are our kids. Last year, we served about 2,000 young people, and this summer, we're super excited. We've got a ton of fun, engaging activities planned here at the Canyon branch, and at our Bluebird branch, we'll be at the Spot, which is over at St. Mary's, 3 days a week for high schoolers. And then we're opening our third branch over at Lane Park for first through fifth graders. And so the kids are going to have tons of field trips. There's arts, sports, games, just every opportunity that we can get them. So hopefully you guys will, stop by and check it out, and we'd love to have your kids there too. So thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Pam, for allowing us to use your space. And I appreciate the Boys and Girls Club donating your space so we can use that money that we would have paid for a space to speakers. So my name's Cheryl Kohlberg, and again, thank you so much for coming and supporting Coffee Break. Today we have Dr. Lori and her husband, Dr. Patrick, who are both psychologists. We're going to be talking about stress and anxiety, but first, just a couple of announcements. If you could turn off your cell phones, turn them on vibrate so we don't interrupt the speakers, that would be great. If you need to use the restroom, it's just outside down the hall. Thank you to Whole Foods and Starbucks for providing the coffee and pastries today. And then the school district wanted me to make an announcement. Oh, did I say my name's Cheryl? Okay. Please feel free to say hello to me afterwards. I'd love to meet you all. The school district wanted me to add on to today's lecture. They're offering a free supportive service to families who have children with unique needs. So they wanted to let you know about that. It's called the Parent Mentor Program. There are 5 mentors who have kids in the school district that are happy to offer help with locating resources, deciphering acronyms, homework suggestions, and assisting with IEPs. So you can see Irene White of the school district if you need further assistance with that. It's a really great resource, and I definitely recommend utilizing that if you need to. And then today we have Lori, who's so graciously offered her time to be here. She's a clinical psychologist, as is her husband, Patrick. Today she's going to discuss signs and symptoms indicative of stress and anxiety in children. She's going to give detailed strategies on how we can be most effective with assisting our children, with a particular emphasis on teaching coping skills and modeling positive strategies to benefit our kids and to benefit the family as a whole. As we know, if our kids are stressed out, the family's stressed out. She's going to provide a presentation that blends education, real-life examples, model behaviors, and specific games and activities parents can use to help our kids. So I'm going to let her give a little bit more background on herself, and thank you so much for coming.
Okay, so I'm not a big fan of microphones, but it's a pretty large group, so we'll give this a shot, okay? One of the themes, can everybody hear me okay? Yes. So one of the themes for the talk today is going to be, you'll hear me say it over and over, and you might get sick of it, but I'm going to keep saying it, is that we need to be communicating about anxiety and about stress and talking with our children. This means that we have to put our phones and our computers down and put them away. I'm not a big fan of phones, smartphones, and computers, although I have them, and although I am a little bit addicted to them at times, but I think it's really important to put those away, to keep this in mind, put those away and have actual real-life conversations with our children about what is happening in their lives and what is happening in our lives. And one of the things that we, Patrick and I, teach our children and talk about on a regular basis is having these internal conversations with ourselves about positive things that you're doing, positive things in your day, small successes on a regular basis, so that you remember that you are awesome, just like they are awesome. So I'm going to tell you my 2 small successes from this morning, and you guys are going to laugh, you're going to think it's funny, but this is what I say in my head. So I wore a white shirt today. So one of my small successes this morning was 3 things. Putting on some makeup with a white shirt on. Drinking a chocolate protein shake with a white shirt on. And getting my children up and ready and dressed and all of that and out of the house without getting anything on my white shirt. This is seriously what I say to myself in my head, because it's important to think about the things that matter. My other second success that I can think of from this morning, which hasn't been very long so far, is I was in the car with my daughter, who is almost 7, taking her to the top of the world for first grade. And she is our daughter who has anxiety and has from day 1. And she had a hole in her sock. So we go into the car barefoot because we like it. It's kind of fun. It's cold on the ground. She goes in barefoot and we're driving and she puts her shoes on in the car. And she has a hole in her sock. Now let me tell you, she's almost 7, but if this was when she was 4, it would have been total major meltdown. And I would have had to turn around and go back and get new socks and so on and so forth. Because we can't wear shoes without socks. And we can't wear socks with holes and things like that, right? So she was laughing in the car about how she had a hole, and it was a big hole in her sock. Her toe was popping out of the sock. And I was like, we were just around the block from the house, and I said, well, let's go back. We can get you another pair of socks. And you know what she said? Doesn't matter, Mom. I can just wear it with the hole. That was so cool. It was a huge success because she has anxiety. Who in here has a child with anxiety? Okay, put your hands out. Who in here knows a child with anxiety? Who in here has anxiety? Okay, so we all know what I'm talking about. You might think I'm a little bit nuts for sharing that story, but it's true that was a serious success for my daughter and for myself and my husband as parents, because she was able to roll with the punches and go to school laughing and smiling, and there was no meltdowns. So, on that note, I want you guys to think, because these, again, are the conversations that we're having in therapy with kids and families, and conversations we're having with ourselves, my husband and I, and conversations we're having internally. We have to keep the conversation flowing in a positive direction. This is what we need to teach our children in general, but definitely what we need to teach our children with anxiety. Because if they can't learn to have positive conversations with themselves, it's going to be a catastrophe in their brain and in their head. And that only empowers the anxiety cycle. Okay? So I'm going to flip over to some introductions here, because I just went into that story just for fun. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then my husband will introduce himself, and we'll talk about our practice, and then we'll get into the heart of the conversation. So, has anybody seen our last name? I don't know if you have it. Maybe you have a business card in front of you, maybe not. Anybody have any ideas on what the last name is? Can you say it? Or is it just scary? 12 letters, right? And she's like, I don't even know. I used to be an Irish O'Rourke, and now I'm an Alec Novicius. So I went from pure Irish and kind of an easy name to something that people won't even say usually. But we are Dr. Lori and Dr. Patrick Alec Novicius. We both have doctorates in psychology from Argosy University here in Southern California. My background, though, is a bachelor's in science from Michigan State University, which is an awesome school, super fun to go to Michigan State, yes. Maybe a little bit too much fun initially when I was there. I got a bachelor in science in wildlife biology. I thought I wanted to be a wildlife veterinarian, which is really cool. I still kind of think that would be an awesome job. But I got into the field. I worked in a couple different zoos. I was a zookeeper. I was an educational consultant for the zoos. It was so much fun working with kids in that environment. I realized I didn't want to stay in that environment. It wasn't what I was looking for, although fun. And then I went off and I skipped my master's. I didn't even get it. I just went into a doctorate in psychology. And I did an internship in South Dakota. My husband and I moved to Minnesota, and we opened up a practice. Our first private practice was opened in Duluth, Minnesota. Anybody know Duluth? Yay, Duluth. Okay. Lake Superior, cold, windy, beautiful though. So we opened up our first practice there in 2010, I think it was, 2010. And it was super successful. There's not a lot of services out in Duluth, Minnesota, psychological services, because nobody stays there. People go and they love it and it's fun, and then they leave. So the people that actually do stay, because they have family or ties there, are in need of a lot of different kinds of services. So our clinic was very successful, and we're really proud of that. We decided not to stay because it was so cold, and we didn't know if it was the right place for our children in terms of the amount of services we could get for them. we have left our clinic open in Minnesota, and we do teletherapy. Has anybody heard of teletherapy? It's kind of new, up and coming. It's supported by all of the Minnesota insurances, which is great. But basically, it's kind of sort of like doing Skype with your client. It's a face-to-face video conference, but it's on a secured measure. And you bill it just the same as you would an individual session. But they won't allow you to do family session that way, or couples, but just individual they will. So we have our clinic open. We do teletherapy services with clients in Minnesota. We're dual licensed in Minnesota and in California. And we came here and opened up a branch in Newport Beach with a colleague. And just recently we opened up another branch in Irvine near the Spectrum, just Patrick and I. So we are loving doing our psychological work. I focus on working with kids and families and traditional therapy and non-traditional therapy. And by non-traditional, I mean I love to go out and do things with kids. I love to play games with them. I love to go on walks with them. I like to do some therapy and then go race them across the park and then go back and do some therapy. I like to do things that are out of the norm because that's how kids learn and that's how they relate. This is very non-traditional because most people just sit in the office and talk, and sometimes that is very helpful, but other times I think we need to get out and do things or do exposure therapy. We have a lot of kids that have social anxiety or speaking anxiety, and we actually get them out in public. I'll go for a walk with somebody out in public and strike up a conversation with somebody at the park, which is something they would never do, and model for them what it's like to strike up a conversation with somebody and then have them try it next time and support them through that process. It's amazing to see how that actually works for clients because they can see the action happen. I'm gonna have Patrick share a little bit about what he does and kind of what his process was, and then we'll jump into the information.
Good morning. I'm just here mostly to support Lori, so I'll introduce myself and then kind of let her take over the main piece. So my name is Dr. Patrick Alfnapchus. I'm also a clinical psychologist and very similar to Lori, took kind of a circuitous route to getting right, which I think makes for a more interesting story. I started out at Michigan State as well with a focus on pre-med and psychology. So got all of my painful science classes out of the way, all the basic psychology classes out of the way, and then went into finance. So I have a bachelor's degree in finance with a focus on international finance, and then worked for a couple of years and realized that what I wanted to do was where I originally started, going towards psychology, and went back that direction. So ended up getting my doctorate in clinical psychology, and somehow, kind of how the universe guides us, I think where our talents are, if we're open to it, ended up really developing a niche for psychological testing and evaluation. So right now, that's probably about 70% of what I do is diagnostic evaluations, psychoeducational evaluations, consultations with parents if maybe their kids had an IEP and they've had, 4 days of testing 3 years ago and it kind of seems like nothing much has changed. Just kind of doing consultation, helping them understand the testing. What I experience a lot of is parents have their kids evaluated and they're never really given an opportunity to actually really understand what the testing means. And without understanding what it means, it's hard to really maximize what you can do with it. So that's kind of the way my career has guided me. I think part of that is the background in finance really helps me appreciate numbers and kind of the more objective approach to making sense of really complex things. So that's kind of where my focus is. I'm also kind of a self-professed tech nerd, and
A little bit of problem with that. I like the tech, he likes the tech.
it's like a love-hate thing. I agree with Lori. It gets in the way so much, but it's so cool. May have a little bit of a addiction to Kickstarter in relation to that. But I love it, and that has been something that I've been able to incorporate what I do with psychology, because I've really focused on utilizing more kind of front-edge measures which are computer-based and allow for distance evaluation and really streamlining the process. So, my focus on evaluation has really been complementary also for what Lori does with therapy, because we can kind of collaborate, and there's some synergy that happens with that type of collaboration. So, with Karina, who is our daughter, she's amazing. I might get choked up, I don't know. I was expecting that, sorry. I'm gonna skip that now. She's awesome, and I think she's a great role model, and wish I could share more about who she is and how she's developed over time. And I'm really proud of us as parents for having helped her get there. So as you can see, this topic means a lot, not only professionally but personally. It was an opportunity for us to really apply all of our training in a real life situation and see how messy it is. Because it's not like it is in the books. You can't buy a workbook and work through it with your kid and think that it's going to help the anxiety. It doesn't work that way. You can't give them a couple of evaluation measures and expect that it's going to just give you the answer, because it's messy. Life is messy. And I think it's really hit home with her of how powerful kids are, and how much they can overcome and learn, and how much they can teach us. So, I'll be here mostly to kind of support Lori, and I'll probably stop there.
You took my part, because I think I might cry too about the situation.
All right, you can just move on.
I mean, I don't know if I can move on. I have to say at least something on that measure. Karina is our daughter, and she's amazing. I told you earlier she's almost 7, but from day one, our daughter has been diagnosed by us with anxiety. I mean, as an infant, this is impressive that we can diagnose an infant. She had it. There was something about Karina that you just knew. I mean, it was hard to console her. She had to have things a certain way. Even I'm talking like infancy, like very, very young. She was that child that, and I'm not saying that this child has anxiety, but she was that child where you put them down, you're rocking them and whatever. First child, you don't know what you're doing. You're supposed to rock them, right? Or like hold them or feed them until they fall asleep, which is not what you're supposed to do. And then you put them down and she's up. Immediately is up. So you have to like hold her a certain way for her to actually stay asleep. And oh my gosh, I swear I didn't sleep for the first 5 years of her life, which means now I'm 10 years older. So we knew she had anxiety. We have anxiety in our family. Both sides of our family have anxiety disorders. And we knew that she had it and knew that we had to start early, because that is the best intervention. Early intervention is the best process. So if you can get your child diagnosed or looked at and consultation and get them help sooner the better. She is amazing. I mean, this girl is the book that we talk about. If there was a book on how to deal with anxiety, Karina is the book. She will tell you, she could come here and probably teach this class. Seriously, she's that good, and I'm impressed by it. And it's not just parenting strategies, although it really helps that our background in psychology assists her with this. We know all these sorts of strategies, but we talk constantly to our children, constant conversation about what's happening, what's stressful, even in our own lives. And I don't mean in an overwhelming way, but if there's something that's happening that's positive or negative or overwhelming, we're talking to them about that and processing that with our children and showing them that we too struggle with anxiety, or grandma or whoever it is has anxiety and she doesn't take care of it so much and it causes her more anxiety, and so we don't want to do that. We want to take care of our anxiety. These are the conversations in a positive tone that we're having with our children, and Karina is the inspiration for this talk, because a lot of these things that I brought here today, the books, the balls, the games, everything that we have here, we literally use at home. This is what my house looks like. It's a therapy clinic at my house. If you want your kids to come over and play, it would be cool. Because we do these sorts of games where we're talking about feelings and we're talking about problem solution scenarios, and the kids love it because what you bring to them with positive energy, they love. They soak it up. That's what kids do. So if we're talking to them about all of these conversations, they're all about it. So at this point, Karina is definitely very anxious still, but she was the child, and this kind of goes into the next topic of what is anxiety and how does it differ from stress. She was the child who I could not leave. I could not leave her at swim class. I could not leave her at music class. I could not leave her anywhere without it being a huge meltdown or attached to me. And granted, we can unattach the child from us, but then what? Then they're hiding under the table, or then it's a total meltdown, traumatic scenario. She was that child. It's been a very careful process of introducing her to her own self-empowerment, to her own self-confidence, and showing her that we have choices and strategies in life. And priming her, talking to her about what's coming and what we're gonna do and what we expect from her as a person, and have her do that and have her wanna live up to that expectation. So when we think about anxiety and stress, obviously we're all stressed, right? Let's do this is fun. Who in here is stressed? Come on, the principal of the school. Don't tell me you're not stressed. I'm stressed for you. And my daughter's at your school. So. Okay, so we're all stressed. I mean, how could you not be stressed? And some of the things, and you already know that this is one of my topics, right? One of the things that really stresses us, and we're having some new research come out about this, is the impact of technology, the impact at our fingertips, the impact of constantly looking at social media, constantly looking at news stories that aren't really news stories because they're just things that people saw or heard or whatever, and they throw out a story, but it's not even the right details. We don't even know if it's accurate at this point in time because people just want to get the story out fast and first. Our kids are looking at this stuff non-stop. And is it good or is it bad? It's bad, right? It's drama, bad focus, right? Just like in high school. Was it good or was it bad? High school was terrible. I mean, high school was bad drama, usually, right? It's all about, that's the word that spreads, the kind of negative or bad drama. Bless you. So technology is really impacting our children. It's impacting us too as adults. But the fact that kids are looking at this or they're online, I have child clients, teenage clients, that talk to me about how they're in school and they're at their class, whatever class it is. It's one of them had leadership class the other day she was telling me about, and the other one was in chorus. And what are they doing? Are they singing or talking about how to be leaders? No. What are they doing? They're looking at their phones. Some of them are looking at their phones on desktop, and some of them are looking at their phones under desktop, but they're still doing it. And the teacher's response per the child is nothing. Nothing. Most children or teenagers are telling us, this is their report, that no, again, this is not an all or nothing scenario, but in these classes that people are not saying, put those away, don't have them out. It's actually okay in some aspects. So they're not, searching the web for what song should I sing in chorus. They're searching the web for, what's happening on Facebook right now, or, Instagram pictures, or whatever it is that they're into at that point, and it's all tends to be negative, or the flip side of that, it's all super positive. Everybody's life is wonderful and beautiful. Look how great I look today, and I just woke up, That's not exactly what's happening. Patrick loves to talk about the selfie scenario. Somebody's like all down and sulking, and they're walking around hating their life at the mall, and then all of a sudden their friend's like, you want to take a selfie? And it's like this big, huge smile. You can see the disconnect of, you weren't that way. That's not how you were walking around the mall. That's not who you are. But when you took the selfie or you want to do something for social media, you change that presentation. So there's this fake presentation of people's lives on social media, and kids are addicted to it because they know nothing else. They've grown up with things like this, and I think it's actually really negatively impacting our children. So when we think about stress, that's one of the components that we want to keep in mind, is the idea of technology. What we show them and what they're learning from social media, because we're also on it too. I mean, a lot of parents are using their phones for various things, and kids are learning from them in that aspect. So even though everybody experiences anxiety and stress, some people take it to a different level. Some people have a different experience of it, and that's called clinically significant anxiety, which is anxiety that needs clinical attention. So it can be described as like an extreme response to stress, or anxiety, and that's like I had discussed earlier, where the person feels, with my daughter's example, the person feels as if there's this sense of impending harm, or there's something, like they're in danger, they have heightened arousal, they're sweating, their mind is going, you know, a million miles a minute of things that could go wrong. They might have increased heart rate or rapid breathing, really really disillusioned and really uncomfortable physically. A lot of times there's this physical or physiological manifestation of symptoms. It's not a behavioral choice. So a lot of times we have parents and families come in and we, you know, hear this story about parents thinking or misinterpreting symptoms and thinking that the child's being manipulative, or they're just causing trouble because, or, you know, and I'm not saying children aren't manipulative, because they are. But in this scenario, when somebody has true anxiety disorder, it's not a behavioral choice. It's actually a part of their neurological symptoms and system. But we can teach children to have a different response to those feelings. And that's where therapy comes into play. So there's two questions that are out there that we can talk about when we're thinking about our own kids. We can say, or think about, you know, is your child more shy or anxious than other children his or her age? That's one question. The other one is your child more worried than other children his or her age? If you answer yes to one or both of those questions about your child, what we're seeing is there's a higher likelihood that we can predict that this person is going to struggle with clinical anxiety. Okay? I'm not saying that it's not a black and white. It's not, if you say yes to that, it means we diagnose them with anxiety. But it's higher predictability that that child's going to go on to develop or have an anxiety disorder. And really, anxiety disorders impact many, many, many of our children. Research is showing that 1 in 8 children are being impacted by anxiety disorders, clinical anxiety disorders. And untreated children who have anxiety disorders are at higher risk to have negative performance in school, to miss out on important social experiences with peers, and down the road might then engage in behaviors like substance use, things where they can hide from and try to calm themselves or cope with the anxiety. Also, anxiety disorders often co-occur with other clinical diagnoses like depression or eating disorders or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So let's talk about anxiety disorders in kids versus teenagers versus adults, because it does vary across the lifespan. We can't just say these are what the symptoms are and they would fit every person of every age. Obviously, it's not that easy. So anxiety disorders in kindergartners, like Karina, she's in first grade now, is much different than an anxiety disorder in myself. Red flags for young children with anxiety are physiological symptoms, stomach aches that come out of nowhere and then all of a sudden they're gone. It's not actual sickness, physical sickness. Reluctance to go to sleep or problems sleeping through the night or in a separate room. Okay, this is our daughter, by the way. Many nights of having to do the sleep process and try to get her back on track. Other things like anxious children will not want to go to sleepover parties. They will not want to go to birthday parties alone. They might not want to go on a field trip without a parent. They're very reluctant to engage in these social activities alone. Of course, it's normal for kids to be anxious or feel jittery from time to time, but the difference is that the child with anxiety disorder feels this fear as a catastrophic component of their life. And then the other piece is that for somebody who has an anxiety disorder, it really negatively impacts their functioning. That's the other piece. So their functioning at school, their functioning with friends, their functioning in family life is impacted by this anxiety disorder. Where the rest of us might feel stressed or jittery about, going on this school field trip or something like that, but we do it and we get through it and it's fine. There's no issue with our functioning. So if we don't see this anxiety disorder young for children, if it's left unchecked, it can lead to some serious problems with the child's education, again, increased risk of substance abuse or depression or other mental health problems. And although anxiety disorders are very common in children, they're often the least to get attention. So, in school, can you imagine what does the anxious child present as in school? Are they a problem? Problem? In what way, would you say?
Not paying attention.
Okay, good. So it looks like they're not focusing, not paying attention, not responding. Good, okay. Other people, do you think that they're a problem? The anxious child in class, do they tend to be a problem? There's definitely an issue. good, okay, so there's definitely an issue with them staying on task because they're anxious and they're having these catastrophic feelings or thoughts. So there's a problem with their personal performance or ability in class, but they're usually not causing behavioral issues. Because the child in school that causes behavioral issues is the one that gets attention, right? Because we need to take them out of the class, or we need to have them sit in a certain place, and we need to address that behavioral issue. The anxious child tends to not be a behavioral problem, so they do have issues with their focus and attention, but they don't have focus on, well, maybe there's something wrong with Johnny, or maybe there's something wrong with Karina, maybe we should kind of figure out what that is. So that's the problem, where oftentimes we're not flagging that child or able to see what's going on for that child. And like I said earlier, many times the parents might think this is just something the child's doing for attention, or this is just something the child's doing to be manipulative, or they just need to get over it. Like, you're old enough. And by the way, that's one of the things I cannot stand, that statement. I'm sure I make it myself to my children. But the idea of, like, these little people that we're dealing with, whether they're 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever, they're very young people in life, to think that they should just handle something when we're not teaching them how to handle it, or we're not modeling how to handle it, or we're not having conversations with them, is not accurate. We have to be the model for the child, and we have to be able to share information with them that would help them handle that situation. So teachers may not pick up on anxiety disorders because fearful children don't usually interfere with their class environment. Oftentimes the anxious child is also a people pleaser. They're also very intelligent, but really Patrick likes to say, they're white knuckling it through their day. So they pull it all together, this is what usually happens. So in the morning, breakdown, tantrum, whatever, fall apart. It's hard to get them going. Then they get to school and they know what the rules are. The good thing about school is it's structured. We know what we're supposed to do and what the teacher expects, which is great. The anxious child tends to white knuckle it through that day, although you might not know they're white knuckling it, but they are, through their day, to get through it, to not have any problems. And then guess what happens when you pick them up? You get all the tantrum, right? Or you get the falling apart, or you get the negative reaction to all that anxiety. And aren't you happy that you get Why couldn't you do this at school? And you're at your wit's end, because oftentimes parents will come in and they'll say, they have no issue at school, they're perfect at school, and they're horrible with me. It's just an issue with them not behaving with me or not respecting me as a parent or something. That's not really the case many times when we do this evaluation and we look at it. But instead, the way that we all function, and it makes sense, the way we function is we think of ourselves first. This is normal. We think about how this is impacting me. So you dump on me and have a tantrum with me in the car, and how dare you? Why me? Because you're ruining my day, and you're making my car ride home so terrible. We're not thinking about what was actually happening that led up to this child having that tantrum in the car, because we're focused on self. So part of the process as a parent is to take yourself, it sounds horrible, take yourself out of it, like as if, right? Because you're already doing that for your children. But to take yourself out of it for a second and focus on the child and try to have a conversation with that child about what happened, what's going on, what led to this, what was the stressor, essentially, for that child. So, go back a little bit, common flags. Complaints of stomach aches or headaches, sleep problems or difficulty concentrating, behavioral changes like moodiness or short temper or clinginess. Sometimes they develop nervous habits like nail biting, picking skin at their fingers. Some kids will go as far as pulling hair and things like that when they're nervous. And also refusals to go to school. I just don't want to go, I don't feel good, I don't want to be there. Anything they can do or think of to get out of school. So, the people who have a child with anxiety in the room, please, again, I just like to do this so I know that we're on target. The symptoms that we're talking about, stomach aches, sleep problems, things like that, are you noticing this in your children? Can you raise your hand? Yes, okay, we're seeing this. Okay, good. So, we're noticing that, and it's impacting our child, and then one step further, we're noticing that they're having an issue functioning. Remember, that's the other component. So they're not doing well at school, or they have no friends, or they're super sad because of not interacting maybe socially, and they feel down. So there's all these associated issues with the actual symptoms of anxiety. Now there's a group in our diagnosis manual of anxiety disorders, and there's a variety of disorders somebody can have. I'm not going to go into that today because we're not talking clinical in that aspect, but some of them are, just so you're aware, some of them are generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, selective mutism, post-traumatic stress disorder, social anxiety disorder, and specific phobias, and panic disorder as well. So going to a professional and having them diagnosed with a psychologist, with a psychiatrist, is your best bet. A lot of times people go first to their general physician because they know there's something wrong, they're not sure what it is, and what we're seeing is people go to a general physician and the physician says, yeah, I think it's probably anxiety based on what you're reporting. They might not even talk to the child too much, but we think it probably is. Why don't you try this medication? They might refer to a psychologist, or they might just suggest you find one within your insurance system. What do you think the parent tends to do? Nothing, or, what was your answer? Nothing. Nothing, or take the medication, because it's from your doctor, who doesn't trust their doctor. Take the medication and try the child on the medication maybe, but no follow-up with psychological care. So I hope we all know in the room that medication does not take away an anxiety disorder, and it might help the symptoms, but it is not the end-all be-all for that child. It might decrease their level of intensity of symptoms and help their functioning, but it does not stop the level or the feelings of anxiety that the child has. So, switching over a little bit further here, there's also some other things. We might think it's anxiety, but there might also be things that are happening that are not anxiety for the child. Things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. I'm sure everybody's heard of that, right? Depression is another one. And eating disorders are often differential diagnoses. Now this is where I love Patrick to come in to share a little bit, because he is the psychological testing guru, and he is amazing in terms of, I have a client come in and I think that it might be anxiety, but I'm not sure. There's also some eating disorder scenarios or symptoms that are going on, but there's also some issues with focus and concentration, and I'm not exactly sure as a psychologist what this exactly is. And I want to know, because I want to know what it is so I can treat it appropriately. I don't want to miss a diagnosis or misdiagnose somebody. So I call up Patrick and I say, hey, I have a client for you to test. And he does his psychological testing assessment based on the child and the scenario, and he comes up with things that are amazing because he's able to pull together the client's history and the information from the client themselves and the information from the test, and then give us recommendations that work for that child. I want him to share just for a few minutes about the psychological testing process, because I think that people don't utilize it because they don't know about it. So can you raise your hand? Anybody in here ever have their child or themselves tested? Psychological testing. Okay, not too many.
Okay, so psychological testing kind of plays into what I was talking about before about being a little bit nerdy, kind of liking numbers and wanting to make sense of things. So one of the things that I think is really helpful to kind of conceptualize with kids is they don't like information gaps. So as adults, if we have a fact and a gap and a fact, we can either be okay with the fact that there's a gap there and we don't know, and that's fine, or kind of make some inferences about what might be going on and how things might make sense. Kids can't have that piece generally of tolerating that unknown, so they fill in the gap. And based on some of the stuff Lori's talked about, how do you think they go with it? Super positive, reinforcing? No. Generally, the tendency is to create a story in their head, which is what we kind of always talk about. What's the story in your head about this situation? What's the narrative you've created? They create a narrative, generally, that is consistent with what they're feeling. And unknown situations for kids generally trigger anxiety. So their story is going to be consistent with their feeling, and it's generally going to go in a pretty negative direction. And it's generally not going to be very true, when it gets into that more catastrophic stuff. So one of the things testing can help with is, as parents and as clinicians, bridging that gap clinically and understanding the whole picture. So my challenge with an evaluation for myself is to take a very thorough history, think of the family environment, the child, the situation, how they're performing in school, socially, sports, and create a narrative that makes sense. Not, here's some information from the testing, oh, it doesn't fit with any aspect of your life. Okay. That's not helpful. We need to have an evaluation that makes sense for the child. And so with testing, we can look at specifically what that narrative might be. Maybe the anxiety is actually a symptom of an undiagnosed learning disability. And so maybe the anxiety is more of a symptom for something that hasn't been identified. Or maybe the anxiety is the underlying problem leading to the school affair. But it can become a chicken or egg type of thing. And with some of the measures I've talked about before, being computerized now, it's really streamlined. It's a pretty easy process. So it doesn't have to be 4 days of testing. It can be more straightforward than that. So one of the things I really enjoy is the numbers, the research, and making sense of things like a puzzle. And it's not always perfect, and you don't always have all of the answers, but you can generally get a sense for strengths and weaknesses, positive approaches that are more likely to work, things to avoid, maybe pitfalls. And also, I think one of the most powerful things is having conversations with parents and the kids about what's going on and helping them shift out of their routine, the reactions. So giving some perspective and information, and then also with the kids, giving them a framework to understand what's going on for them. Not, I can't do school, because that's generally the default place they go if they have struggles. I can't do school. And that becomes a very true narrative if something's not done. So giving them information and power and tools, and then transitioning that into empowerment, like Lori's talked about, with specific skills for the child, for the parent, education, and then helping the school system also understand so that they can help the kids. Because generally, people working in the school system really care about kids, and they want them to do well. They want them to succeed, and they want them to reach their potential. That's a pretty universal truth based on my experiences. But it doesn't always show up that way, and I think there's also some negative attributions to it not showing up that way. But they care, and so with some information, their job is easier, they can be more effective, which helps them feel better, and the child can generally do better. So the evaluation can be a really important process and complements the treatment. It can also complement the medication piece, because we can get a sense of, are symptoms so intense that the child probably needs some medication, or it needs to at least talk to their doctor about medication to take the edge off, so that they can get to a level of anxiety that can internalize some of these skills from therapy? Or is it at a level where probably we can just work through it from a behavioral and therapeutic intervention? So that type of grading of the symptom intensity can also show up with some testing. Another thing that I wanted to bring up before I finish up this piece is the misunderstanding of ADHD. And I just wanted to kind of bring that up because it's very much paired with this topic of anxiety. I think right now people generally kind of cringe when you bring up the topic of ADHD, because it's kind of a overused pseudo-diagnostic label that gets thrown around. And generally, the stereotype that pops into people's head is this kind of hyperactive, rambunctious, third grade boy kind of being really rammy and bangy, and that's kind of the stereotype that will pop up. Parents struggling to get kids to do their homework in the evening. As more research is coming out and we're understanding more from a neurological perspective of what's going on, what we're understanding is ADHD is not actually an attention problem, but it is an executive functioning dysfunction. An executive function doesn't just regulate your attention at school. It regulates all of your higher order functioning. It is how we manage ourselves, and that includes emotions. And if we were to kind of put images to emotional experiences, anxiety is kind of the jock bully emotion. Because generally if it's there, it'll mostly overpower most of the other things. Because it shows up so intensely and it has such a propensity for uncomfortable physiological symptoms that a child has to respond to. You know, if they're having anxiety symptoms that borderline on panic and they feel like they might die, they're going to respond to that. And so it shows up as really intense anxiety sometimes when it's actually an attention problem. And the problem is more associated with executive functioning and emotional regulation over actual underlying anxiety. They're very different. It's a very different process. One is a symptom, one is the problem. And so making that shift with ADHD and understanding that it's not so simple as identifying that a kid is nervous. It's more complex than that. Like I said, it's messy. It is. Life is messy. So with ADHD, there is often difficulty regulating emotions. There's also difficulty regulating attention to things that are interesting. So again, it's not an attention problem that a kid can't pay attention. It's a problem with what they pay attention to and how they regulate. So linking that with anxiety, anxiety is almost always a bedfellow of sorts with ADHD. And so it needs to be something on the radar and can't be something that we dismiss as, no, they don't have ADHD because they don't cause problems in class. No, they're a good student. They don't have ADHD. They come from a good family. They don't cause behavior problems. Okay. You still haven't told me any reason it's not ADHD. You can look at it, maybe it is, maybe it's not, but it needs to be something on the radar. And it adds, I think, a layer of complexity to how we look at what's going on with the child. And testing can help with that, and I think it's grossly underutilized, not only because it's kind of my thing, but because it gives us so much information, it can be so empowering. So, Lori tells me a lot, most people don't really care about testing as much as we do.
It's true.
It's true,
sad,
it's true.
It's
But I think that's good also, that they don't care about it because then they don't have to deal with it as much. But there's a lot of information to be gained. So the differential diagnosis is not always an easy process, and it's not always something to just jump to. This is anxiety, and I know exactly what to do. So with that, we can talk more if you want about the diagnostic process, but I'll hand it back to Lori and she'll go over some specific techniques that we can use as parents and as clinicians or teachers or just adults modeling and mentoring kids how to be more effective in their lives so that they can reach their potential.
Patrick's tested many of my clients over the years, and there are some that stick out in my head where it was, treating for anxiety and depression because that's how they came in and presented. It turns out one that I will never forget was actually a juvenile bipolar diagnosis, which was a totally different scenario in terms of treatment, and her life has been completely altered by being tested by Patrick and the team that was working with her and myself, and she is in a wonderful place now. So it's things like that make me push and talk about topics like this, but really about psychological testing, because I think it is underutilized, and I think people are scared of it because they don't know what it is, and they stay away from it. They don't know where to go. Will insurance pay for it? Can I afford it? So on and so forth. I think talking about it and even, we always welcome people taking our business cards, and we have our emails on there at work. Send an email. If you think your child might benefit from a psych testing scenario, send an email and ask us all the questions you want to ask us about that, and we'll let you know, so then you can make an educated decision. But I think it can be really beneficial. There are many clients, children that come in and they've been treated for years, or not treated for years, under a certain guise. It was depression, it was manipulative behavior, it was an eating disorder or something, and then we do this psych testing assessment and we come up with things that are not those diagnoses. And it alters the course of treatment, and it alters the client's life in a positive direction. Yes?
I'm really sorry to interrupt.
That's
but
okay.
This is just welling up inside of me. If this is a really accurate way to determine what somebody really has,
Right.
why are parents left with this process of trying to figure it out? Why is not the field of psychology honoring that you really need to tease these things out through testing?
Yes.
Why are people walking around with having been diagnosed by multiple highly respected psychiatrists and taking mass quantities of medication with no recommendation for talk therapy? Why is this allowed to happen in the field?
Right. It's a great question.
I mean, I don't know.
I'm with you. Like, me and you could go out and walk the streets and talk about this. Yeah, for real. Yeah, let's do it. I'm free later. I mean, I agree. There are so many people that go to their, like I said, their general physician or to a well-renowned psychiatrist, and they get a diagnosis, and I mean, we can talk all different scenarios, and I can't pin it down to one thing, unfortunately, obviously, but many times the assessment process is not complete. The whole person is not looked at and evaluated. They're not doing the measures from getting measures done by teachers, by coaches, by parents. I mean, this is what our psych assessment process looks like. It's very complete focus, complete person focus. So if you look at one picture or one component of a person, you can be like, oh yeah, that really looks like depression, or yeah, that really looks like anxiety. But then you look at all these other factors, their family history, their behavioral history, how they grew up, in what sort of environment, with what sort of parenting strategies, then you come up with a totally different scenario. So I agree, I think that it should be the first course, actually. I would love for people, we've talked about this, I would love for people to come in and have an assessment at the clinics, you know, an actual assessment, get their appropriate diagnoses, and, you know, have a whole look at the person, and then be able to figure out what their treatment plan should be from there. Instead of, take the medication, come back in 4 weeks, and we'll see how you're doing. See how we're doing on what? We haven't even talked about what it is. I told you one piece of who I am. So I think that it's something that needs to be managed better. I totally agree with you. And I don't have an answer on why it's allowed, but a lot of bad things are allowed in a lot of different professions, right? And it gives that profession a bad name many times, which brings me into my next topic, which is when should we reach out, and this mental health stigma. I mean, a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that their child, quote unquote, needs therapy or needs testing. Did somebody have
Well, I was just wondering, because it sounds to me like he's assessing people differently than I've ever heard. Like, is it more like you're just super into the numbers and you're really like able to tease out everything? It just seems like it's more involved what you're talking about.
It's super intense. You should see him writing reports.
Okay.
If I could video this, like
But
his
does that
head.
seem different to you than
Yeah.
most psychologists?
Well, yeah, yes.
Okay.
Let him speak on that.
So, a lot of people don't do testing because it's not easy. And it's something that you can't get away from graduate school on. And so, if there's a gap and you get rusty, it's a rough process to get back into it, and you have to be committed. And it's not, it doesn't pay, because you're putting way more time into it than you're gonna get paid for. And it's complex, and a lot of people don't put in the time. Maybe some people, the numbers don't make sense. So there has to be a combination, I think, of personal interests and qualities, but also being willing to be thoughtful on your own and going your own direction. So I think it is different than what you get a lot of times, and I don't have a clear answer of why it's that way. It just is. But it's awful. So I can talk about it. I know I care about it more than a lot of people. So I have that in my head a lot. So I don't want to talk too much about it. I'm happy to talk to you about it more. If you want, send me an email, give me a call. I love to talk about it. Probably more than you. But it's a complex process, but it doesn't have to be painful, and it's not the perfect answer. It's not. I can't tell you exactly what it is 100% for sure. But I can give you a lot of information that'll steer you in a better direction than just not having it.
Do you think most parents, frankly, are scared of the answers they're gonna get?
I think there is some of that, but I think also it's more just ignorance about what is available and what the possibilities even are.
Sure.
Because, you know, I do supervision for postdocs and interns and things on site testing. And one of the things that always comes up is them being so nervous about giving feedback on something like, oh, I just did this evaluation. I have to give this parent feedback that their child has diagnosable mental retardation, or has autism, or has Asperger's. I'm having anxiety and panicky. I'm scared to tell them. What if they get mad at me? Right? Well, what if they do? But what if they want to hug you? Are you going to let them do that or not? Because that's also a possibility. And more often, there's more relief because just like the educators and the people in the school system, parents just want to know. Because you can work with what you know. If you don't know, you're shooting in the dark, and that's frustrating. And a lot of times, frustrating emotions and experiences as a parent, because we care so much and we want to do something that's effective, comes out in less productive ways. And then you can imagine the snowball that creates then with the kid shutting down, not wanting to talk, not wanting to share. Then, you know, as Lori talked about before, how anxiety shows up in kids, then the progression into more oppositionality, shutting out, closing down, isolating, secrets as teenagers, and then getting into, in adulthood, more dysfunctional relationships, kind of being on a roller coaster, being unsettled, feeling like you're never quite hitting your potential, not able to kind of pursue what your interests are. It can progress, and I think more of that is associated with lack of knowledge than a lack of desire to have knowledge. That's my experience. So, yeah, I think it's less of not wanting to. I don't even know what else I don't even know.
Well, and how it impacts the client. So what we find too is when you give feedback to the client,
Yeah.
whether it's an adult client or a child client, and you're doing it, if it's a child, you're doing it in a family scenario, the impact that has on the child is amazing, or on the person is amazing. It's that, have you had an aha moment in life yet? Has anybody? Where you're like, oh my God, that's what happened, or that's what it means? It's that amazing, like, light bulb moment where the child or the teenager is sometimes crying because somebody finally gets it. Somebody is finally labeling, if you would, and I mean that in a positive way, what is happening for that person. It's not because I'm bad, it's not because I'm dysfunctional, it's not because I'm stupid, it's not because I do something wrong and I'm the worst kid in the family, it's because I have anxiety, or it's because I have bipolar disorder, or whatever it is that the person has. It's an amazing moment for that person. I think there is fear associated for the child and the participant and the family, but I think more often than not, it's really a super positive experience.
And I think oftentimes another thing that happens with evaluations as they're normally done is that the kid does all of this work, fills out all these forms. They might do, you know, if it's a full neuropsych battery, like 4 different days of testing sessions. They're asked to do a lot of work that's really tiring for the brain. And then what happens to them? The parents get a report and the parents get feedback. What about the kid? What are they going to do? What I talked about earlier. They're going to fill in the gaps. There must be something wrong with me. Oh my God, I had to do all that stuff.
I failed the test.
I failed those tests. They fill in the gaps. So I love using the testing as an intervention, essentially. It's the start of treatment because you're giving them a framework to understand what's happening, and you can challenge the narrative they have in their head. And it's really empowering. And kids are generally pretty nervous about it, and they're skeptical and they're worried. Mostly because they're worried about letting their parents down more often than not. Because if there's something wrong with them, then their parents might be disappointed. So it's a really empowering process. I love it. I could go on for a long time, but I'll let Lori talk about some more specific interventions.
Okay, feel free to walk if anybody needs to take a light break or something, or get some more delicious pastries. Okay, so let's jump into the kind of the meat here. So we know what anxiety and stress looks like. We know how it shows up. We know some differential diagnoses. We know that psychological testing and evaluation is a major component of the process. When children learn that they have power over their thoughts and reactions, and then parents are taught to be empathic instead of disciplining or being negative for the child, it results in positive self-confidence for the child. So when we have children come in, and families come in, we teach them strategies. Remember, we're talking about the child, the teenager, and the family, and the parents. We're teaching them strategies to deal with anxiety and stress. These strategies tend to be super creative. Our strategies tend to be super creative. I don't know if everybody's are. But we want to appreciate the child's temperament, for starters. And we want to appreciate the child's brain. So, Karina, our daughter, who we love, has an amazing brain. Like her dad. I think her dad has an amazing brain too. Hence the psych testing component. Her brain is nonstop. It's on the go. She's super artistic. She's super creative. She's not high energy per se, but she wants to be busy. She wants to be entertained. She's always thinking. I have to appreciate that when I deal with her and I implement strategies. So I can't say, you know what, I see that you're anxious, you should just go, sit over there on the couch and watch some TV. This does not work for Karina. Watching TV is not a way for her to manage her anxiety or her stress. So I have to come up with some, and she helps me because she's really good at this point, come up with some really creative strategies. So now we're talking about artistic measures, getting them to do an art project. And it can be emotion focused, or it can be anxiety and stress focused, or it can just be an art project. As soon as we can take the anxious brain and channel it somewhere else that suits that person and that brain and that temperament, we have success. So basically we're trying to change the pattern, or change the focus, I should say, of the brain at that point in time. Because the person's obsessing and catastrophizing. So if we can change it to, something that we've done in therapy is we've made, we call them worry shields. So you take some big paper and you put out like a shield of armor, yeah. And you have the client decorate it, paint it, whatever they want to do, put glitter on their shield, whatever suits that person. And we talk about how we can use that shield to deflect anxiety. And it's something that they're creating. It's something symbolic of guarding them against their anxiety. Another one that we've done, or we've seen in therapy too with clients that works, is if they're into something like sewing. Remember that we're being creative here. So as parents, being creative is really important too. If you're into sewing, getting some little fabric and having them make a heart. Have you ever been to Build-A-Bear and you see the little hearts that they put inside the bears? So they're like small little hearts. We call them pocket hearts. So it's something that the child, like a transitional object, it's something the child could bring with them. They make it, they create it with you. You buy the little stuffing, you cut out the heart shape, you sew it. You sew it or they sew it together. A lot of times if you do it with them, it's more meaningful. They carry it with them as a way to remember you, to remember their inner strength, to be able to touch it. Some people are tactile, they want to touch and rub things, like a worry stone. They can use this heart as a thing to rub for themselves. Positive coping strategy cards is another one. So this is Karina's book. We just did something super simple. I mean, anybody can do this. I took various colored paper sheets and cut them into squares. And she wrote down different strategies that she could use when she needs to cope with anxiety. One of them was imagining her safe place. Now, talking to your child about what their safe place is part of this process. Where visually, or where in the house is their safe place? Where do they feel good? Where do they feel content? So I'm going to read you a couple other ones that she has here. Pray is another one. Breathe deeply. We're going to get into some of these too in a minute. Hum a song. Drink some tea. She likes to drink tea. It's kind of fun. Wrap yourself in a blanket, in a warm, fuzzy blanket. Listen to music. Draw a picture. Go for a run. Count slowly. Ask for a hug. And put your feelings in a bucket. We have the visual, I don't know if you've read the bucket story that they have out for kids with feelings, but something you can do with children on that note is you can get a bucket that's covered. And you can talk about when you have negative feelings or a bad day or something, you can literally dump that stuff. you can dump it in the bucket. And they can dump that symbolically by actually putting something in the bucket, or they can just dump it like mentally thinking about putting their feelings in the bucket, but then you have to cover the bucket and put the bucket away for now, because it's not gonna take over the rest of your day. Granted, we're continuing the conversation with the child, so one of these scenarios will not fix it. You have to keep having these conversations and keep going over these strategies with children to make them work. Another thing is scents. If somebody's into scented oils or scented candles, sometimes there's these stress rubs or these stress lotions and things like that. If a child really likes lavender, they're calmed by that scent, using something like that and letting them experience the scent and put it on or have it in their room can be helpful. So teaching children about feelings and teaching and modeling empathy and teaching and modeling positive self-talk. Remember how I started this conversation about my white shirt today and my daughter's hole in her sock? Yes? I talk with my daughter about that. When I pick her up from school, I tell her, oh my gosh, this morning was so amazing. You had a hole in your sock, you didn't care, it didn't impact you, that's awesome. I tell her I had this talk today and there were all these people that showed up and we talked about anxiety and all the things you've done to manage your anxiety, and it was awesome. And we almost call me talking about you. I mean, these are the conversations we're having with our daughter who has anxiety, because she needs to hear these conversations and she needs to be part of these conversations. Because now, and even down the road, she's gonna keep coming back to us and telling us, hey, guess what happened today? I normally get so nervous talking in front of my class, but I did it without even feeling so nervous today, Mom. Or I shared the pictures of the butterfly that just hatched in our house, and I was so proud of myself. These are the things that are modeling appropriate and positive self-talk with our children.
So one of the things I just want to add to this real quick, just to maybe kind of add some framework for the conceptualization of this. Laura keeps talking about it's not just this one thing. You don't do one thing and then the anxiety's gone. And I think that's really hard to understand and be difficult to accept a lot of times, because you just want it to be better. But what we're talking about conceptually is rewiring the brain. From a neuronal perspective, our brain creates different speed lanes with neuronal pathways. The ones that we use the most get the most reinforced. They're the fastest, they're the strongest, they're the most prominent. That's the default setting. So if there's baseline anxiety there, if it's really intense, if it's been there for a long time, that's the fast lane. That's the left lane. If you're going down I always get the numbers mixed up. If you're down the freeway, that's the left lane, the one that should be fast. One of these interventions is not going to fix that connection that's been so reinforced. It's going to take time. So I grew up in northern Michigan, in the upper peninsula of Michigan, rural area, so lots of space. And I like to think in pictures a lot, because it helps me communicate what is going on conceptually. So one of the things I like to think about this is, and I think it can be helpful with these interventions, is think of a farmer's field and imagine him driving across his field every morning for 40 years with his dog to go check on his cows. Every morning, exact same path. It's going to create a pretty clear path for him to travel, to the point where he's probably not going to have to think very much or do very much to get where he wants to go at some point. And what if one day he wakes up and he decides he doesn't want to take that way anymore? Is he going to be able to take the same approach? No. If he takes the same approach, it's not going to go well. Because if he takes a new path through the field, he's going to have to hold the steering wheel with both hands. He's going to have to pay attention to what's going on. He's going to have to look for obstacles that he doesn't have to pay attention to before, because he's not taking that route. He's going to have to, and he's going to have to decide where he's going. Unlike the other time, he can just go on autopilot. And the next day, if he wants to take that new path again, it's not going to be fixed. It's still going to be a little bumpy. He might even have a hard time seeing where he went. The grass might just barely show, because it'll grow up. But if he takes it again and again and again and again, over time, that becomes the main route. And that's what we're talking about with these interventions. Cumulative building over time. It is not one thing. Karina did not get where she is right now because of one intervention. It has been literally from the day she was born. Literally the day she was born, we were in the nursery, and First-time parents, you have no idea what you're doing, you read every book and know whatever, you know. Here she is, in her little crib, nurse comes in, oh, she's not swaddled. They like swaddling. It comforts them, it soothes them. I said, I don't think she likes it. I don't know what I'm talking about. I've never had a kid before. But that was my gut. That was my parental intuition. No, she doesn't actually like it. No, they like it, it soothes them, they like being held tight, they like the pressure, it's good for them. All right, well, you're the expert, right? Good hospital, good nurses. Swaddles her, leaves, maybe 5-10 minutes, crying, upset, doesn't like it. Swaddling off, good to go. Let me look out the window. She does not like swaddling. 10 swaddling blankets we have at home, we can get rid of them. Never gonna use them. She doesn't like it. So that piece doesn't just go away. And that started day one. And now Karina's at a point where she can laugh about it, she can talk about it, she'll print a picture and say, let me go color. And she'll come up with these strategies on her own, and she'll start games and conversations and reframing worries. And that was a process of us every day holding the steering wheel and trying to take a new path and teach her what it's like to follow that new path. It is not a slow process. So, realistic expectations, being honest about what this is. It is a decision to commit to things being different.
I have a question. So you're talking your 7-year-old. I have an almost 17-year-old.
Sure.
So I've missed opportunities. I think we guessed and did some things correctly.
Yeah.
But now that we're like junior year AP classes, everything just coming down upon them, what other interventions do you have for that age group?
Well,
Whether or
it's
not she was diagnosable at the time, you know, this is like the place that we're at right now.
You did a lot more right than you did wrong.
True.
Fact. So that needs to be the narrative that you want.
Right, but I don't think like a feeling box is going to work for her at this
You could probably put that in the wrong category.
You know what, she's at a place, what I was gonna start off saying with that is, she's at a place to have some really striking positive conversations about, you know, we didn't know, or it wasn't known that this was such a struggle for you when you were younger. We now know, and there's a lot of things that you can do, and you can be proactive about learning these strategies for herself. So the sense of empowering her at 17 to know what her issues are, to be able to identify them, to be able to recognize them when they're happening and implement strategies that will work. And it depends on the child, because every child is different. That's what I was saying about appreciating temperament and brain and all of that. So what are the things, I mean, starting with what are the things that help her to relax, to de-stress, to positively cope? The other piece is, you know, what are the things that have been ingrained in a negative way in her brain? Like he was talking about the pathways. So what is her negative self-talk, and what are her hurdles that she has to get over, and how can we reframe those hurdles now? Because now you guys are in a better place, and maybe you have more information, or you're able to see the big picture more. You know, helping to teach her, or helping her to learn through books, through therapists, through a mentor. You know, what are the things that she's good at? Where does she excel? How can she reframe her strategies, her negative issues? You know, basically it's, I think, more of an educational perspective and a positive self-talk scenario. Although feeling boxes, I have to tell you, could be beneficial, because she might, if she's into art and feeling, it could be a good thing. But you know, you can alter any of these techniques. They might sound juvenile, but you can alter any of these techniques to be appropriate for teenagers or people later in life. We have young adults that come in that are doing things that I do with, you know, 8-year-olds. I mean, they're, and I'm not saying that in a negative way. It just works for them. They like the artistic approach. They like putting feelings in a box. They like playing ball while they're talking or whatever, and they're 17. There's no problem with that. It's just appreciating where she is and trying to get her help with that. Yes.
I just wanted to touch upon, is there a difference with helping parents manage their children's stress who are not like diagnosed with a clinical issue, but just, like she was saying, are going through a stressful time in their life?
You know, I think there's many crossovers to both scenarios. Somebody who has diagnosable clinical anxiety and somebody who's just a very stressed child or parent. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do that are similar in both of those scenarios. The person with the clinical anxiety, though, is the person that has to continuously reuse these strategies so that they become second nature to them. Where the person who is dealing with stress or lower levels of anxiety, it's not as intense for them. You know, it's not as overwhelming for them. So I think the strategy and the approaches are similar, but maybe the intensity of using that, you know, using those approaches is different. If that makes sense. Yes?
Fourth high schoolers, one of the things, but I think you can use it across the board. I have a kid who's 16, I've lived with her anxiety also since day one, also could not stand being swaddled, so.
Yes, there you go.
I have a lot of strategies. One of the things that helps is front-loading your kid. In
Yes.
other words, you find out what makes your kid anxious,
Yep.
and before they go into that scenario, you already talk to them about how they're gonna manage it, positive feedback, imagining themselves doing something well, praising themselves afterwards, but managing it ahead of time. And I can give you a very quick example. My daughter gets very nervous going to the movies. She happens to have Asperger's. She was going with a kid the other day. We talked in the car all the way to the movie theater
Sure.
about how she was going to manage her anxiety, and she did so extremely well afterwards that I was like, okay, we're going to somewhere you want to go because you did a phenomenal job.
Reinforce
And then
it.
Reinforce that positive. So front loading for the little kids, I have a great strategy that worked for my daughter when she was real little. And that was, she would draw a picture of what she was anxious about. Sometimes she'd show it to me, sometimes she didn't want to show it to me. We'd put it in a paper bag, and we'd put the paper bag somewhere so that the anxiety was in the paper bag.
Right.
If she wanted to look at it again, she could. She knew it was there, but it was put aside. And then I just have one other point, and that is, you talk about medication, and I would say this, that it is a comprehensive approach, and there are children that do need medication, and that medication doesn't completely handle it, and cognitive strategies also not necessarily completely handle it. So I don't think that parents should be afraid of medication if the experts are dealing with tell you, my kid came to me when she was in 8th grade and said to me, I've done every crazy thing you've asked me to do. I've tried every diet. I've done every psychologist. I need medication.
Right.
You need to get it for me. And at that point, as a parent, I said, wow, I'm a crappy parent if I don't listen to what my kid's saying. And that has been able to bring her down to the level.
Absolutely.
So it's a comprehensive
It's a comprehensive approach. You're absolutely right. I mean, having the best approach is a team approach, in our opinion. So having multiple people on this team that are focusing on the same goal, and the child and family being able to learn from all of those team members and seeing them in the same place is an amazing scenario. We don't see it often, unfortunately. You know, it's hard to get that team in place, but it is so important for that comprehensive plan to take place, and then for parents to implement that plan, like you're saying, and support it along the way. And it does vary by age, because it will change over the course of time. It sounds like things are going really well for her, so that's good.
Well, I'm here hoping to find out her strategies, so.
That's what we said, it's a never-ending process,
We're
right?
still looking for more help.
Right.
And I wanted to just kind of pipe in real quick to answer Cheryl's question about parenting strategies. If your child doesn't necessarily have a diagnosable disorder, does this not mean anything? And to that I would say, educating yourself, if you are so inclined to just go kind of seek resources and kind of just read books, and if that's how you learn, that's one great option, parenting books. Another would be, don't be afraid to call a psychologist, email a psychologist or a therapist or a professional in some way, and just set up a consultation. It doesn't have to be therapy forever. Just meet with them. Maybe go sit at Starbucks, and you know, it's an appointment, but it's a consultation. What are some ideas? What can I do as a parent to be more effective? And some of that is going to have to be tailored to your child, but it doesn't have to be this big intervention. It's more about how do you develop yourself as a parent, because we're always developing ourselves as our children grow. So some books that I really like, one is A Parent's Guide to Gifted Children, if you have a gifted child. Gifted children have anxiety a lot of the time because they're really smart and they make abstract associations that they're emotionally not ready to effectively manage. So I think that needs to be appreciated. But it doesn't need to be this big intervention where the kid has to go to therapy. It's just more, all right, well, let's talk about this from a parenting perspective and do some consultation. With the testing and kind of being more neurologically focused, neurobiologically focused in how I conceptualize and where I go with things. Daniel Siegel is a great author and researcher up at UCLA. He's kind of bridging the gap between neuroscience and effective therapy interventions. He's got some really great books out there. One is No Drama Discipline, that I really like, and again, just like a parent resource. And another one that just recently came out is Brainstorm. His recent work is focused on the understanding from a cognitive perspective what's happening to children as they're transitioning from childhood into adolescence and then into adulthood, and what the evolutionary biological pressures and factors have been over time, what's happening in society and what are our expectations now, and where are they neurologically and neurobiologically, and how do those things make sense together. So he does that type of bridging of research and science into treatment, and this book, Brainstorm, is really great because it's got these pieces called MindSight tools, where he even has the edges of the pages shaded so you can see where they're at, and you can just pick it up, read one of those, and it's a brief nugget. It's a small section, but it can be a standalone thing that you're educating yourself with. Maybe you use it explicitly how he talks about it, maybe you kind of tweak it and generalize it for you. But again, giving yourself tools as a parent to conceptualize what's going on and then what you do with your child. And it's about creating a model of parenting, essentially, that is effective for your child and where they're going. And part of that is also an appreciation for where you're going. What are your family morals, values, and objectives? And it's not right or wrong. That's what your family values. That's where you want your child to go. So let's help create a plan that works for that child.
I have a question / observation / how have you seen, what have you seen as far as an increase, if you will, in the number of teenagers that are coming in, or just in general, that have higher levels of stress and anxiety? I mean, as you get into the high school, I have 2 kids in high school, I have 2 kids in the elementary school, and 2 at AU. There's more and more pressure on our teenagers to do well in high school. It would be very interesting to know how many of our kids that are fighting for every grade point they can get to get into the best schools. What's the I'd love to know from the district, and districts everywhere, what's the percentage of kids that are getting into these great schools, that are actually switching schools once they do get in because there's such a pressure to get into these great schools? Are they successfully staying in the schools? Are they switching? What's the percentage of teenagers that are now presenting more symptoms of stress and anxiety? How are we dealing with it? I hopefully missed your presentation, but technology is such, it's such a part of what we have to know and what we have to live with. Yet the addiction to technology is so on the rise, not only with teenagers but with adults as well. Not only as what we need to do to live every day, but also as an escape mechanism in teenagers and gaming and this real world scenario. So how is all of that colliding and affecting just our whole being as teenagers, as adults, and
in short, I would say we're seeing a rise and increase, and it's a combination of.
How do we manage all that? Because it's also.
We look at our family, we look at our situation, and we do something about it, and we don't be ashamed of it.
But you see what I'm saying? I mean,
I know, I get it. And we're on the same page. I mean, that would be more of a policy type of presentation. This is more about for families, and what you can do is you can construct clear expectations in your family and realistic emphasis on what's important and what you value as a family. So I think we're running out of time and need to wrap things up.
Can I just make one quick point? Cheryl actually has a book that she just wrote called Unplugged.
I'll touch on it just
Yeah,
Let's
which I
have
think
5 more
is.
minutes, if you can just wrap up and then maybe take 5 questions and then I'll, announce.
Yes, okay, give me 2 more minutes.
Real quick about these strategies, is there a book, speaking of books, is there a book that is a good handbook for parents with a slew of?
We'll put some resources on the Coffee Break website, so I'll get them from her, and then I'll send out an email with those resources after.
There will be a number of handouts that are gone now, but that will be posted for people to print. And I have book lists that I create of books that we use in therapy oftentimes that are really beneficial, and books I use at home with my kids. You can come up after the talk and look at some of these games and things that we have that are also super helpful. Stress balls. Okay, officeplayground.com seriously has the coolest stress balls, and we use them all the time. I use them. My daughter uses them. We use them in therapy. It's something that a child, and it doesn't matter what age they are, can squeeze, can play with, can use when they're feeling stressed. There's so many different options. One of the handouts that I have has a list of strategies that are beneficial for us to use. And remember, you can alter these strategies based on the age of the child and also based on who the child is, what their interests are. So I have kind of a cheat sheet of some ideas that we use in therapy, but I welcome emails and phone calls and conversations and more talks like this for us to be able to brainstorm, share information, but also brainstorm with other parents who have anxious children and learn what they've done and what helps them and what helps their family. But it really, as Patrick said, this talk is focused on identifying anxiety in your child, figuring out when you need to get them help and who you get them help from, finding this overarching team that's going to help the child to get the help that they need, and then following through with making the change. The lifestyle, it's literally a lifestyle change. You're changing the course of this child's life, and you're also changing the course of your own life. Our lives have been significantly impacted by having Karina as a daughter, and will continue to be significantly impacted by her presence in our life. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's a super, super positive thing. I've learned so many things about myself. I've learned that I have to change, and I have to learn new things, and I have to ask for help. And we've learned how to be a good parenting team, and we keep looking for more resources to help our daughter and help continue the conversation with her about the idea that it doesn't matter if you're scared or nervous or anxious. We still do what we intend to do, or what we desire to do, or what we think is right to do. We don't back away because of anxiety. We continue on because we can. That is a conversation we have in our household almost on a daily basis. Our kids could recite it, they could tell you what it means, they can give you examples of when they do things when they're nervous, because that is the dialogue that we need to be having with our children, to continue to empower them to carry on the process. Because when they hit 17 and 18 years old in college and they go into these high-stress situations, they need to have their toolbox of strategies and of positive comments to themselves of what they can do and how they're going to do it. It's really, really important. And the idea of getting mental health help for the child and implementing that if you need to in your family is also really important, because it models for them that when you have a problem later in life, or when this anxiety comes back in full force again, you can ask for help and you can get appropriate help and you can see positive success. That's what we want to know, because this doesn't stop. It's a never-ending process. So I want to open it up for questions because we're close to the end. Yes? That's okay.
And this is, you can answer this really quickly, but I'm really intrigued with the idea that there really are good tests now.
Right?
Is this a new phenomenon? Because we had probably 3 or 4 rounds of testing, including private psychoeducational specialists, and it was very, very expensive, and we never really got any sense of what the heck was going on. So, was that just that we had an incredible number of people that weren't very good, or is there a whole new generation of tests?
I'd say both. There are new tests, and there are people who just do testing but don't do a great job of actually integrating it into making sense for this child. A lot of people are really good at doing testing and telling you factually what this means, and I often get reports of previous testing that I'm going to be supplementing or reviewing. It's great testing. I don't actually have to do any more testing. What I actually have to do is interpret and integrate what's already been done but was never done. And so, and it's also how creative you get. I'm just editing an evaluation I'm doing right now for a child, and he's got chronic pain. And so that's not something that's super common, but I didn't just dismiss it. I found a pain catastrophizing questionnaire that's research-based that I was able to get access to by being able to ask for help and tell people that I wanted some resources. And now I have some information about how the parents view his pain, how they react to it, and that adds a whole new layer. And so it's how creative you get and how outside your box you're willing to go. And a lot of people who do testing, you come in and they'll say, here's my set of testing, this is what I do, and it costs this much money, and that's it. And that's what I get for everybody. And that's what I push back against.
Well, the associated question with that is, but there is some feeling that the schools don't really want to find the nuanced problem in the test results because it has a associated obligation to pay for something.
I'd say that goes more into the policy presentation.
Yes.
I just to add on, I just wanted to ask you if any of those, if any of that testing is neuroscanning? And what you think
Like
about
on
that?
clinic?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just in general, is that becoming more, I've heard about it, and also,
We're not really there yet.
we're not there yet.
Yeah.
So if someone's,
You know, it's great that there's research coming out where you can do a PET scan and you can see what an ADHD brain looks like on medication and off medication, you can see the difference. It belongs in research journals still. It's not refined enough to be out. And I don't know what Dr. Ahmed is doing, or Damon, depending on who talks to us, because he does his thing. But for the masses, that technology. There are things like EEG neurofeedback, where it's more surface level EEG brain mapping. Quantitative EEG is something where you can get a brain map of areas of overactivity, underactivity that can be intervened with for neurofeedback, which is an intervention for anxiety that can be helpful. But that's been around, that's not new. The real front edge technology with the imaging stuff, unless you get in with him and understand what he's doing, it's not ready for mainstream.
I would just like to add on to the testing in terms of kind of just my experience specifically is that we had a lot of testing done for my son and kind of came back with really not a diagnosis. They said, oh, he's fine, he's really bright, you should be fine. We spent another year, he struggled, cried. I took all my tests to Dr. Patrick and he diagnosed him. And he's a teenager and it was definitely an aha moment for him to finally realize that there's nothing wrong with him. And it's very powerful, and for all of you who don't feel like you have an answer, I mean, have someone else take a look at it and he explains to you. It's changed our lives.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
I'm fascinated by the information gaps. And as a parent, what are the most common ones you find just with everyday stuff that we can help fill those gaps that we don't even realize we're leaving open?
Going back to what Patrick was saying about the children
But
filling
yeah,
in
the
the
kids,
gaps.
so there's,
Right.
yeah, exactly.
I think that goes back to this idea of, you know, taking your family unit and having these really intense relationships with your kids and putting the phone and technology away and being present with them to have these conversations on a regular basis to figure out what is the source or what are the sources of their anxiety and what are the things that they say in their head. I mean, once we're connected and close with our kids and we're having these constant conversations, you're able to ask them things like, oh, that happened at school, you know, how did that feel, and what was your response, and what was so-and-so's response, and then all of a sudden you're starting to see where well, I don't really know how she felt, but it seemed like she felt this way because of this. As soon as we're carrying on these conversations, I think we start to identify the gaps, because I think not until you have those in-depth conversations can you figure that out, because we can't just say, hey, where are your gaps? You know, it's hard to do that with young kids especially.
I get that, but it feels like almost like there's scenarios that as parents, as older people, we handle things and we're like, oh, well, this shouldn't be a big deal.
Right,
And
right.
then those are big deals for
Got it, yes.
people. And I'm just wondering, in your experience, like, do you
Okay,
see
you're
some
talking in general.
commonalities
Yeah.
of those kind of things?
Just to add on that real quickly before we finish up is, I would say, from a testing perspective, one of the challenges I have for myself as I'm going through an evaluation, making sense of things, is making sure I'm not assuming everything that I write down or that I'm willing to write down in a document, I want to have founded on something. So as parents, and I have Lori's dad in my head with one of his favorite sayings growing up is don't assume, because you know the thing about that. So,
We all know that thing, right?
but I think those pieces are kind of address that as parents, being observant and conversing, and also slowing down and unplugging enough to pay attention and observe, and don't assume that you know why that child is acting that way or what they think about it. Ask them. So challenging yourself as a parent at whatever age, not to assume, but to engage in discussion and to accept an answer of I don't know or I'm not sure, and help them sort it out. I think that is the biggest piece. And I think we need to wrap it up there, but we'll be hanging out here if you guys.
Don't go anywhere, don't go anywhere.
So-
Yeah, so I just wanted to add on to what they've been talking about, and I want to let you know that they're going to be here